The news that Tina was pregnant was met by her husband's relatives without any enthusiasm. Even her husband, Connor, wasn't particularly thrilled. He just shrugged and said, "Well, if you want to have a child, go ahead. But don't count on my mother's help. She raised me and now has the right to rest, not babysit grandchildren." Tina's in-laws also reacted less enthusiastically to the upcoming addition to the family. Her father-in-law didn't even smile at the prospect of becoming a grandfather soon. "Well, if there's going to be a baby, so be it," he said, getting up and heading to the kitchen, making it clear that the subject was closed for him and was not worthy of any further discussion. Her mother-in-law snorted contemptuously, looked Tina up and down, and hissed angrily under her breath, "Who knows whose child this is? You got pregnant way too fast. You could have lived a bit more for yourselves. What's the rush? It's only been less than 2 months since the wedding, and you already want to burden my son with diapers." "I'm not going to have an abortion," Tina retorted. "It just happened. I didn't plan it on purpose." "Oh, sure. It just happened all by accident. Things like that don't just happen," her mother-in-law exclaimed, throwing her hands up. "Consulting with your husband was not an option. You act all innocent, pretending you know nothing and understand nothing. Did you even try to use contraception?" "Excuse me, but I'm not going to discuss my intimate life with you." "Oh, look at you," her mother-in-law said menacingly, hands on her hips. "You'll give birth and we'll do a DNA test. I doubt this is my Connor's child. You were in such a hurry to get married. Maybe you were rushing to cover up your shame at my son's expense. And he, the knave fool, will end up feeding someone else's bastard his whole life." "How can you say that?" Tina stood with her eyes wide open in surprise, not knowing what to say to this angry, aggressive woman. Connor had once mentioned that his mother didn't approve of his choice and had tried in every way to ruin their wedding. She believed her son deserved a prettier and wealthier girl and had a few suitable candidates in mind. Back then, Connor boasted that no one had the right to tell him what's what and that he would marry the girl he chose, not his mother. Tina had been delighted by her beloved's loyalty and had readily agreed to live with his parents for a while after the wedding until they saved up for the down payment. "How can I say that?" "I can say and do whatever I see fit for my son's happiness," the mother-in-law continued. She seemed to relish making Tina lose her temper, tormenting her with impunity. "I know your kind, country girl. You rush to get knocked up as soon as possible to stay in the city and tie down a decent man. How dare you say such things?" Tina's hurt had already turned into anger. She wasn't going to put up with such treatment, even from her husband's mother. So she struck back. "You must be judging by your own experience. I came from a city that is almost as large as yours, and you could have at least asked me or Connor about that. I came here to study, not to get married. Where are you from, anyway?" "As I recall, Connor told me his father brought you from some village when he went there for his university internship, and you didn't date for 2 years like we did, but for 2 months during that same summer internship." Her mother-in-law was taken aback. She stared at her son, who had been hiding behind his smartphone and not participating in the conversation. Of course, he had been listening closely to the argument, but didn't think it was necessary to intervene or defend his wife in any way. "Connor, what else have you told her about your parents?" his mother asked menacingly. "Mom, what's the problem? It came up in conversation once, and it's not like I revealed some big secret. And what's the big deal if you're from the countryside anyway?" Connor tried to justify himself while glaring angrily at his wife. Gosh, why did she have to go and say this, getting him involved in this mess? Once we're alone, he'll have a word with her so she knows her place and keeps quiet. "Son, you should hold your tongue sometimes, or if you're not smart enough to know what can be said, And what can't? You should have asked your mother. Connor's mother was getting seriously angry. Not only had her son brought home someone she didn't approve of, but he was also sharing the details of her past with her. And you, she turned to her daughter-in-law, know your place. Until we get a paternity test, your child will only be yours in this house. Fine, and if the test confirms the paternity, will you apologize? Tina asked. Are you out of your mind? Connor snapped. My mother will not apologize to anyone. Connor, but she didn't just insult me, your wife, but also your future child. Doesn't that bother you? And why should I be bothered just because Mom suggested the child might not be mine? Who knows with you modern women? Tears welled up in Tina's eyes at his words. She had hoped until the last moment that her husband would at least try to stop his mother's accusations. But it turned out he was 100% on her side. Why did you choose me, someone so unreliable, then? She said, barely holding back tears, and noticed her mother-in-law watching their conversation with satisfaction. She had achieved her goal, sowing discord in her son's still fragile family. She would drive this unwanted girl out of her home. And what are you smiling about? Tina turned to her. She decided she would no longer remain silent. If no one in this house was going to protect and support her, she would stand up for herself. Do you think I don't know how you've secured your family? I've done some math. Connor was born 6 months after your wedding. Or do you in your village carry babies for 3 months like cats? What? What did you say? Her mother-in-law's face turned crimson. How dare you talk about my life? Just as you talk about mine. You practically called me a whore when I mentioned your grandchild. You think I'm okay with that? People often project their own behavior onto others. Maybe your son and his father should do a little paternity test first. At a loss for words, her mother-in-law slapped Tina hard across the face. Who you think you are to judge me? Get out of my house now. I don't want to see you here ever again. Tina stood for a moment, waiting for any reaction from her husband, but he just looked at her and smiled stupidly. Connor, don't you have anything to say? She asked, pressing her hand against her burning cheek. He just shook his head, still smiling like a dummy. He was somewhat curious to see how this would end. He imagined his wife begging his mother for forgiveness, pleading not to be thrown out. For some reason, the thought of her humiliation amused him greatly, though he couldn't understand why. Well then, Tina's voice held no hurt or tears, only disappointment. Living in this house wasn't worth the constant humiliation from her in-laws. If she didn't fit in, they could find someone else. She ran to the bedroom, grabbed a travel bag from the closet, and started throwing her things into it. Go make sure she doesn't take any of our stuff, her mother-in-law, now calm, chirped to her son. It'll be a hassle to find her later with the police. Smirking, Connor followed her to the bedroom, standing in the doorway as she packed. Look, you brought this on yourself, he said. I warned you my mom has a strong personality. If you'd kept quiet, this wouldn't have blown up. Kept quiet? Tina stopped packing, shocked. So you're saying I should just take the constant humiliation and insults without defending myself? What did she say that was so insulting? She just grumbled a bit. That's what mothers-in-law do. You don't even understand. And this, she pointed to the red mark on her cheek, is just a grumbling to you. Is that normal? Connor shrugged. Well, she didn't kill you. Oh, and I should be grateful for that, right? Are you serious? Sorry then. I have nothing more to talk to you about. Nothing at all. I'm leaving. You can handle the divorce proceedings yourself. But I think your mother will make sure her child doesn't get about it either. You fool. You'll come crawling back to ask for forgiveness. Where are you going with your child? You said it right. This is my child. My child and mine alone. Your mother does have a point here. With that, Tina closed her bag and dragged it towards the hallway, stopping for a second in front of the ever-smiling Connor. What a fool I was, and where were my eyes? I spent 2 whole years on you. Oh, come on, Connor chuckled behind her. It's a big question who spent what on whom. Time will tell, was all she replied bitterly, closing the front door behind her. She would sleep rough at the station, but she would never return here for anything. Let them simmer in their bile. After spending the night at the station, Tina left for her parents' home on the first available train. She knew they might not understand her decision, but they wouldn't kick her out. They would help with the child until she found a job. Her parents were kind and caring people. Several years passed. Tina stayed with her parents. Though they thought she had acted hastily by leaving her husband, they still supported her, and she never regretted her decision. She switched to distance learning and gave birth to her son, Austin. Then Tina met a wonderful guy who loved her and her child as if they were his own. The young couple prepared for their wedding. Meanwhile, Connor found little solace in life. Using her connections, his mother quickly divorced her son and just as swiftly married him off to Sharon, the daughter of her friend who owned a chain of pharmacies in the city. The girl proved to be a worthy bride, matching her mother-in-law in aggression, quarrelsomeness, and laziness. After their endless arguments, the father moved to live in the country, and Connor slowly but surely took to the bottle. Drunk, he shed tears that he hadn't held on to his fate and was now unhappy. His mother, too, regretted more than once that she had treated the modest and well-bred Tina so badly, who had been a very industrious and kind girl. But life is a one-way track back.